It's going to be an interesting last webinar of the year about artificial intelligence in the built environment. And I think this topic is definitely getting a lot of attention and interest. Okay, so who are we? I'm Marloes Reining, and I am here facilitating this webinar for you. I'm a director of the Regenerative Collaborative South Africa. We are a non-profit organization focusing on transforming the built environment into a regenerative one. And we really try to do that through these kind of webinars and educational events that showcase regenerative design and construction strategies. So all our webinars, as I mentioned in the beginning, are recorded and they are now also uploaded onto YouTube. So we have our own YouTube channel and where you can still revisit some of the webinars we did previously. So again, a very big thank you to SIAD, or South African Institute of Draughting. They did sponsor the validation of this webinar so that you guys can get the CPD points. We're very grateful that they are assisting us with this because it is very hard to get sponsorship for this. So a big thank you to SIAD. If you want to follow us, it's always great to see if we have lots of reaction on LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and also our Eventbrite page, which is our registration for this. And if you then follow us there, you'll get automatically the next event invite coming to you. So that's where you can find us. We're not yet on all social media, but these seem to be the most viable for us. So I was going to launch a poll. So I'm interested to understand how you guys feel about the implementations of the different AI applications in the construction industry. Oh, that's good. No negative. I guess you wouldn't be joining the webinar if you were negative about it. So that's good to see. Positive. Okay. Cool. Skeptical. No, that's really good. Positive, skeptical, neutral. Cool. I'm quite positive about it. I think it's a great technology. I usually have ChatGPT open when I'm working and asking them a lot of questions. So in preparation for this webinar, I actually asked them, give me a nice opening sentence to this webinar. And this is what it came up with. So welcome, architects of the future, engineers of innovation, and builders embracing the bite-sized revolution. Today, we embark on a journey through the digital scaffolding of progress as we unravel the profound impact of artificial intelligence in the vast landscape of the built environment. So that was the suggested. Also asked ChatGPT to give me what are sort of the arguments against AI, and it came up with like it would job displacements, ethical considerations, lack of understanding, cost and accessibility, and unintended consequences. And then I obviously also want to know what the positives are of artificial intelligence, and there were a couple more. Increased efficiency, optimized building design, predictive maintenance, resource management, data-driven design making, innovation and technological progress, cost saving and job creation. So on the one hand, people are thinking to losing their jobs, and on the other hand, there is a job creation. So yeah, I found that's quite interesting. All right, so let's dive into the expert presentations. We've got 3 speakers today. First up, we have Milan. He's a sustainability consultant, and he has a passion for bridging the gap between nature and the built environment. He is with Ecolution Consulting at the moment and oversees most of the edge projects within the company. He's got a master's in sustainable energy efficiency cities from Wits University, and his thesis looked at the Living Building Challenge. And that's also how I got to know Milan, as I was one of the ambassadors for the Living Building Challenge in South Africa. So we got to chat a lot more, and then I brought him on as a volunteer for this events committee as well. So really great to have you here sharing your knowledge. Then we have Stefano Semprini. His academic training was in mechatronics, and he spent a decade working in mechanical engineering. And thereafter, he started traveling and ended up in sort of the biomimicry, and I'm sure he can tell a lot more about it. So always interesting to hear from an engineer going into the biomimicry space. So I'm really looking forward to your presentation. And then we also have Sechaba Maape, who is the founder of Architecture. I don't know if I pronounced that well. Sechaba established architecture as an alternative experimental practice aimed at producing architecture and design based on the philosophical and theoretical framework derived from his 10 years of experience, an in-depth study of indigenous knowledge systems and spaces in South Africa. He's also a professor at Wits University, and he had a very exciting exhibition going on around AI and the built environment, which I'm sure he will be talking about a lot more. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Milan and take it away.
Thank you, Marlis. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So myself and Stefano will be presenting on artificial intelligence and biomimicry. This was a submission that we did for a competition on the topic by Never Enough Architecture. And yeah, we're just going to take you through our sort of thought process and yeah, how we came up with the inevitable final ideation and just give you some insight in how AI was used through the biomimicry process. So who are we as Biomimicry South Africa? We are storytellers, engineers, innovators. Someone called us designers. We are biomimics, system specialists, and lovers of life. We're an organization that promotes the study of the imitation of nature's remarkable efficiency in its designs to create the conditions conducive to life. So at the bottom there, you'd see that's the core team, including myself, Stefano, Jane, Michelle, and Gama. We just advocate for biomimicry in Southern Africa and across the continent, and yeah, look to promote it globally as much as possible. So a quick introduction to biomimicry for those who aren't too familiar with it. Biomimicry is basically the conscious practice of learning and emulating from nature's genius. So applied at a deeper level, we might describe biomimicry as conscious emulations of life's genius. So let's break that down a little. Conscious meaning intentional. So it's obviously intentional emulation. Emulation being learning from living things and then applying those insights to challenges that humans want to solve. And finally, life's genius, which is the acknowledgement of the inherent wisdom of our biological elders and human beings that we are apprentices to. So the lovely gentleman that I have on the slide there is Mick Pierce. And yeah, he has sort of took this principle of biomimicry and truly applied it to a building here in Southern Africa known as the Eastgate Center in Harare. The building was designed to mimic a self-cooling mounds of termite mounds. And despite being located in a hot climate, the building maintains comfortable temperature without the need of air conditioning. So it's honestly a perfect example of designing and mimicking natural processes in architecture. Obviously, there's a little caveat that this was before AI was around. So biomimicry has been around for a lot longer time, but it's just adapting those principles from nature and just seeing how it is. I just wanted to give a few more examples of how biomimicry has been applied in architecture. The Eden project is the first one that comes to mind, designed by Grimshaw Architects. Basically, world's largest greenhouse, semi-modular, and was basically inspired by the shapes of soap bubbles. In the middle here, we have the famous building known as the Gherkin in London, designed by Norman Foster, and utilizes a ventilation similar to that of sea sponges and corals. Finally, on the right, we have the Sagrada Familia, which is the Roman Catholic Church in Spain, designed by Antoni Gaudi. Basically started construction in 1882 and is set to only be completed in 2026. So quite a long process, but the design is quite intricate in its biomimicry design principles, particularly the use of bone structures, for example, which really attributed to its engineering capacity. So just some background on the competition itself, which was through Never Enough Architecture. And what they were looking for was that intersection between architecture and biomimicry and the utilization of AI. And this was sort of the criteria that they were looking at. So ultimately, it was all about innovation with effective use of biomimicry in architectural design, the utilization of AI integration, and how AI tools were used in the design process, basically to come up with a concept for an architectural building. The use of originality, so obviously the uniqueness and creativity of the design, pushing the boundaries of architecture as much as possible. Presentation, how it was clearly and effectively presented with a written description. And finally, a big emphasis on sustainability and how an outcome can combine biomimicry and AI in its design. And so there weren't too many limitations in terms of what could be presented. And so we as a team at Biomimicry South Africa took it upon ourselves to really challenge ourselves. And so this is sort of the framework which we came up with. One of the restrictions from the competition was that the structure itself had to be 4 levels or less. And obviously the requirement was the utilization of AI in the conceptualization process of this building. So as a group, we decided that we would look at a typology of a multi-purpose community center located in the Tangwa Karoo. And we specifically chose the Tangwa Karoo because of its sort of semi-arid desert conditions, which also is challenging in terms of water sort of collection and things like energy. It's quite a remote area as well. So we really try to push ourselves with the location to try and build a community center in a bit of a harsher environment.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stefano Semprini. I'm co-director of Biomimicry South Africa. So just to jump in there straight away, yes, the Biomimicry Design Spiral is loosely based on an existing design methodology, the double diamond, with a particular emphasis on how we go about looking for strategies in nature to emulate, and then how we go through a process of abstracting those to be able to emulate them, and then we use what we call life's principles to evaluate those designs in this iterative design process, so that we can always be. It's almost like you can almost look at life's principles like an audit sheet. You can start at the beginning and say, right, these are the things that nature always does, and these are the things that nature never does. And then you go back into the design process because it's so iterative. You go through evaluation, you go back to the beginning and say, right, let's refine our scope, let's discover new biological models, let's find, and so this process goes on and on. And as I say, it's a practice. And what I'd like to highlight is that with any practice, I can talk to you about it until the cows come home. But unless like when you play soccer, if someone talks to you about soccer, until you get onto the football field and start doing it yourself, you're not going to have that embodied experience of doing the practice. So just bear in mind that it might seem a little bit difficult to understand what it all means, but that's just part of it, because until you actually do the practice, it is difficult to really understand. But I guarantee you that once you start doing it, the aha moments, the eureka moments come, and one realizes, flip, there's so much that's possible when we start to really understand how life has been evolving for the last 3.8 billion years. So to move on, for this particular project, the call was to look at how AI can be used in the process of conceptualizing a architectural project. So on the one hand, it was quite straightforward. Just use existing artificial intelligence tools to help you go through this architectural conceptualization process. But we really wanted to look at how can we create a workflow out of this? Where in the design process might we be making it easier for that process to take place? And we spoke about things like, well, in the relationship with the architect and the biomimicry practitioner as the consultants and a client, there's this translation process where you're trying to get from a client's wishes and expectations into a design. And could we improve that rapid prototyping process by doing something like recording the audio of a conversation, using AI to transcribe that,
So the utilization of AI, yeah, it was quite a process that we looked at. So for example, again, he was mentioning that we sort of took input from most of the team and transcribed it using our sort of voice to text. We then input that text into the AI models, particularly ChatGPT. And it would give us then sort of transcripts and sort of shortened versions of what we were basically discussing and looking into. We would then feed those models into direct input into DALL-E, for example, which is an AI image generating software. There was also direct input from users. And so it was this process of utilizing what we've discussed, but also direct input from what we've sort of researched over time as well. And this became an iterative process. Along with DALL-E, we used Midjourney as well, which was what the competition guidelines required. And at this stage, it became quite iterative. So we would input it into the AI. It would obviously give us an image. We would then use those images, possibly combining them to create newer images, and sort of just go through this process to see what the AI would interpret our input as. And then finally, we did a lasting evaluation. And so I'm going to take you through our sort of almost the biomimicry design spiral that we went through, just to sort of get a better understanding of what the biomimicry process is, as well as where AI was integrated. So initially in the defining and scoping phase, we looked a lot at just questions, truly asking questions of what did we want to achieve, like what are the rules and how are we sticking to them? What are the social challenges that we're addressing? Who are we building this for and why, which is quite important. I think we often as architects and designers, you sort of go into a situation and you build this beautiful building, but who are you building it for? Why are you building this particular building? And what is the true function that the building could serve? Was it just a community center? Could it be used as a sort of community kitchen as well? Could it be used as for housing? So looking at dynamic architecture as well. We also looked at sort of what skills did we have within the team? What could we utilize, grab onto? What challenges did we foresee in this project, in the building, in its natural environment, in its location, how to adapt to that? What AI tools could we utilize in the process? Our own unique perspective of biomimetic architecture, tangible benefits, and also the real challenge to solve. And a lot of these things, as I said before, so we would have open discussions over Google Meets. We would do voice recordings. That voice recordings would then be transcribed into words, which would then put into ChatGPT to refine this process. So from the beginning, we were utilizing AI, and it was quite a fun and interesting way of how it would interpret some of the words we said as well. Moving then to biologizing the key functions. So once we identified that it was going to be a community center located in Changuakuru, we said, okay, let's truly understand what the function of the building would be and how it would integrate within its natural environment. And so these were a set of 6 functions that we really tried to embody within the building, looking at harvesting energy, protecting from solar radiation, temperature control and passive cooling, capturing water, filtering that water, as well as the storing that water. Again, ChatGPT would take a lot of the information that we have given it and also assisted us in identifying these key biological functions. Interestingly enough, it gave us a lot more functions that we could have looked at, but we really thought that focusing on energy and water is, it's a given in this day and age, given what we are currently going through. So this was our focus, and we really tried to look at how we could incorporate this visually as well. And so we get to our discovering and abstraction phase. And again, in our discovery phase, when we identified the functions, we said, okay, let's go back to the draw. So in general terms, with biomimicry, this would be sort of the research stage where one would go onto Google, look at textbooks, look at things like that to truly identify what fauna, flora, plants would be key in really utilizing the functions that we identified. So this discovery phase, like I said, is basically the real research domain of trying to find where those functions are in nature and how to really distill them and utilize them. However, again, being an AI challenge, we said, okay, let's utilize the AI in finding the research. And interestingly enough, it gave us quite very localized examples of the functions that we're looking for. What I've displayed here is just a few of them, such as the Namakwa chameleons. We've got meerkats over here, termite mounds. I'll go a bit more into detail about how these were utilized in the building, but just to show you that these are very locally contextualized to the Tankwa Kuru, and it would somewhat be a tad bit more tedious to do this research on your own. So there was quite a gift in utilizing the AI to bring this information to us in quite a quicker process. In the abstraction phase as well, so this is basically, again, seeing the functions that the fauna and flora have and really abstracting those principles that they demonstrate, particularly the functions that we were looking at again. And so we identified what these key species, how they adapted to their local environment and how we could utilize that and bring those functions into the building that we were looking at. And so this is where we get to the fun part, which is the emulation and creation with AI. And so we truly then took those functions and utilized them within, again, ChatGPT, and try to extract prompting. So prompting, basically a description of what we would like the image generating software to, just keywords that would allow it to get a better understanding of what we wanted to visualize. And so I've just put on the top here sort of the functions we were looking at, for example, capturing and filtering water. And these are sort of the 4 examples that really captured our function, although not as integrated into the environment as we'd like, not as practical to build, for example, but quite unique ideas that the AI has come up with. Yeah, it was a fun process, I must say. So these were sort of the 4 individualized function buildings that we had come up with. And through the process also, we started integrating, merging images just to see, what the software would give us. And yeah, this is just a few more examples that the software produced for us. To the right over here, we have one of the merged images. So as you can see, we took inspiration from the Namakwa chameleon, for example, and how its reflective skin would assist in protection from solar radiation. And so as you can see here from the building, the facade sort of mimics that chameleon-like skin structure. A lot of the inspiration, again, these sort of large tree-like structures to assist in capturing water, solar panels, obviously for energy efficiency. A lot of, again, trying to incorporate it within that desert structure. And so it took a lot of inspiration from cactuses and aloes that are there, utilizing underground sort of reservoirs to contain that water, how it naturally would, a lot of tree-like structures as well coming out of the ground. So it was quite inspiring to see that these are not usual concepts that you would come up with, but quite inspiring things. Just a little note here that a lot of these images were generated by DALL-E, so they are quite artistic in nature. But as we continued, we also used Midjourney, which became a little more realistic. So over here in the middle is sort of one of my favorite images as well, and really integrates the building into its environment. A lot of natural flows and curves, the utilization of the ponds as well. And yeah, just it was quite an interesting process of how it utilized the landscape as well. So for example, we would feed it actual images of the Tankwa Kuru, and it would sort of embed the buildings into the landscape itself. Sort of like this image at the bottom here, we truly sort of took the image that we provided it and integrated a bit of a contemporary design, but truly built it into the rockscape there. These images here also utilizing sort of that bird's nest spiderweb concept to harvest water, for example. Quite radical ideas, but again, it's just that utilization of the AI to come up with truly conceptual ideas. And so as our final product, this was what we submitted for the competition, also known as the Biosymphony Oasis. This is our community center that the AI generated for us, and we were quite happy with how it truly utilized all of the organisms that we were looking at and inputted it into not only the local landscape, but into the architecture itself. And so over here on the side, we just had a little breakdown of which organisms were attributed to certain features within the building, harvesting and solar tracking energy, inspired by sort of the desert rhubarb. We have, again, protection from solar radiation, inspired by the Namakwa chameleon. And again, looking at that facade, that changing facade, looking at how chameleons adapt to their environment and applying that to the built environment. Temperature control and passive cooling, termite mounds, similar burrowing of meerkats as well. When looking at capturing water, looking at spider webs again, looking at that intricate net-like structure to capture fog, desert rhubarbs again as well, looking at sand filtration, so even taking inspiration from not just fauna and flora, but also the ground around us, and looking at how the structure could be used to not only capture the water, but filter it through sand mechanisms. And finally, water storage, looking a lot at cacti and succulents, and just the way that they have the ability to hold water in very arid regions. This was the Biosymphony Oasis building that we produced, and I think we were quite proud of how it utilized and really captured the functions that we were trying to look at. And yeah, came up with a really cool modern design, which I really like. Towards the final stages, obviously, we then look at evaluation. So again, within the biomimicry design spiral, once you get to the stage, you obviously utilize life's principles throughout it. But at this stage, you really delve deep into life's principles, which is a set of 27 principles that ultimately nature utilizes everywhere. And so how can these principles then be incorporated within whatever you're designing? Things like, how does it adapt to changing conditions? Can it evolve to survive? Is it locally attuned? Is it resource efficient? Does it use life-friendly chemistry? And one truly inspiring thing to note here is that if you utilize life's principles in any design that you have, you will have a truly harmonious, integrative, natural design that is just seamless with the natural environment that you're trying to design for. And whatever human challenge you're trying to design for, it would seamlessly integrate within its surrounding environment. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend having a look at life's principles. On that note, the Never Enough Architecture competition had their sort of announcement of the winners yesterday. And so I just wanted to give you some insight into who the winners were, and also, what globally AI has inspired people to do. And so I'll start from third place. We had the Silla Air Cleaning Center. This was designed by a team in Italy. And one thing I must note is that a lot of the submissions that were there looked at, and I found this particularly a little frustrating in biomimicry architecture, is that there's a lot of emphasis on just the form, and biomimicry is also about function and processes and systems. So really understanding that you've got to look at it more holistically than just the form. But this was in third place was this cleaning center designed by a team in Italy. In second place over here, we had a fog catcher designed by a team in the US, really utilizing spiral shapes and just again using a lot of the local organisms to get and obtain water capture. And in first place was the Shatarupa, designed by a team in India. And again, this was inspired sort of by banyan trees and integrating as much nature into the design as possible. Again, I am trying to bridge the functions, bring in the functions a little more. That would have been my only comment. Just utilizing, understanding that nature can be incorporated in a lot more ways into architecture than we really understand. So those are the winners, but I do think that our submission was still really cool. So and thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation. This is Biomimicry South Africa. If you do want to get in touch with us, just go to our website at biomimicrysouthafrica.life, and feel free to contact both myself and Stefano.
Great. Thanks so much, Milan. I have to agree with you. I like your design better than the others as well. So sorry you didn't win.
Thanks, Rose.
That was a very nice presentation. I'm gonna jump onto the next presenter, Sechaba. Take it away. I'm curious, like, I think we've seen it now from a biomimicry perspective, and now Sechaba is gonna talk about more like indigenous knowledge systems. So I'm gonna be a different angle to AI in design. Great.
All right, thank you so much for the invitation, and let me jump straight into my discussion. So I'm actually happy that one of the presenters studied at WITS under my PhD supervisor, Daniel Irura, in the SEEK course. And I'm actually going to be running that course next year. So I'm gonna maybe need you guys to give me some tips. Anyway, so a lot of the work that I do is based on some principles that came from my research. My research was trying to understand how people survived climate change in the past. And I know it sounds very ambitious as a project, but we, in the end, realized that how people in the past managed to survive change was through certain practices. And we call those practices in everyday colloquial language, we call them rituals. But I call them kind of like paradigmatic pivots or tools that pivot your paradigm. And so this has been the conceptual framework I've used for my work since I graduated from my PhD in 2017. And the idea is that rituals or these tools are the way in which people are in sort of a harmonious flow with the world and the environment, especially the natural environment. So in these diagrams, you can see the people in the center having a ritual dance. That's actually an image of the First Nation people, the Khoi and the San. And as they're moving in their ritual dance, they're going through this process, this psychological, neurological process, because we looked into a lot of secondary data from neuroscience to show that through these practices, people actually dissolve pre-existing past conditioning, and they can recalibrate their minds or their brains so that they're brought into a sort of current state, or a state in which you've adapted into the current conditions. And so for me, this is how I believe we can also survive climate change, is by reframing our paradigm through various tools. So when I was doing my research, I found a lot of stories about a mythical snake from my region where I was doing my research. So this was from the Northern Cape, which is close to the Karoo that the previous presenters talked about, which at the time was a marginal environment and people had to survive quite marginal conditions. And so this narrative of the snake is everywhere in our archaeology and anthropology. And even as I was growing up, because I'm from that region, I heard this story. And the idea is that the snake actually represents those contingent forces in life. And, you know, I won't go into too much, but the aim is that, you know, you as a human being have to confront this otherwise terrifying being if you are unwilling to adapt. So there was always a kind of, what I discovered through my research was that indigenous knowledge systems fundamentally were about, and especially with First Nations people all over the world, were fundamentally about having people be aligned to the flows of the natural world. So I'm sure the biomimicry guys will agree with me that, you know, that's what we're hoping everyone can achieve. So my work is a lot about paradigm and paradigmatic shifting. And you'll see, I know my colleague said that, you know, it's not always about how things look and the form and whatever, but I think there's a place for that. And I'll show you what I mean a bit later. So I'll show you just some of the work that I've been doing. This is not my work, obviously. This is work of other architects. And what I feel these architects have achieved in their work is what people call resilient architecture. So on the left, this is a school, a floating school in Nigeria. And obviously the idea is that because of the sort of, you know, the risks and the precarious nature of living in water like this, they created a far more resilient, model, which is this school that can float going up and down with the water. So that's, again, this idea of, being in the flow with the natural world. And that's what builds resilience. And then on the right, this is Francis Carey's school in Gando. And here the idea is that you've got this sort of very heavy base at the bottom. You've got a huge canopy roof at the top. You've got the capacity for a breeze to move through. And then you've got a much more, modest material in between, which is this earth brick kind of thing. So I took these kind of principles and, I've been exploring these ideas for some years now, as well as looking at indigenous architecture. So similar to Francis Carey's building, I've been very interested in this idea of the canopy, or something that kind of protects, and something that allows for a building to have a more modest materiality in between, and then a very robust material at the top, which is the steel roof in Carey's example, and then a hard kind of base at the bottom. So the image at the top shows a kind of tree with people underneath, but it could also be the entrance of a cave with people sitting underneath, or it could just be a modern shelter with people sitting underneath. And that's actually the concept. So the second image shows a kind of shelter where people are inside a rock shelter. But inside that rock shelter, these people are living in these grass mat huts. And the idea with that is that the grass mat huts allow them to be able to move from place to place in concert with the flows and movements of nature. The shelter becomes the hard thing that protects them from, really harsh weather. And then the sort of beehive grass hut, you could almost see it as like a shell or like a secondary skin, which is a lot more versatile and adaptive. So they can pack it up and they can leave with it, which means whenever they need to adapt and move, they can do that. So then the third image, now that's Setswana architecture. And if you look at the little hut on the right, what people don't know is that in early days, the hut actually was kind of like a conical thing at the top, which acts as the shelter. And underneath, there was like a beehive hut. So there's actually two structures there. And then the hut at the top, the conical one, is held up by these posts. And then the beehive hut, which is underneath, is sort of, resting on the ground. And it's a much more ephemeral material. And then the thing at the top is protecting from, rain and other weathering. So I kind of took these ideas along with the ideas of resilient architecture from people like Carey, and I tried to apply these same principles. So that's what you're seeing at the bottom, and I'll show you a bit more. So the idea is to have a hard surface at the bottom and a kind of beam and column system that raises space between the roof and the hard surface at the bottom. And the idea is that that flat roof is meant to have solar panels on top. The little round structures underneath, they should be made out of ephemeral materials like clay earth, because the clay earth won't be able to survive without that. It will have to be replastered constantly. So the aim is that that middle space there, where the clay earth round structures are, can be very adaptable. So when it needs to change, it can change. So the outer shell acts like the cave or the rock shelter. The inner stuff is the more adaptive stuff. So you can almost think of this as a cave where those dwellings on the inside are where those mobile hunter-gatherers live. And if you need to leave, you can leave. If you need to stay, you can stay. It's this principle of this very adaptive structure. So this was actually a project I did with Lemon Pebble Architects, and it was supposed to be a center for traditional medicine. So I've designed buildings using similar principles where, it's kind of like the in-between bits, which in this particular case were made of pallets, and they were kind of in between brick pillars, and the bottom was kind of concrete base. The top was a steel roof with solar panels on top. But, this wasn't the full application of the concept. And here was another similar kind of building where, again, you have a sort of roof that's supposed to protect the base at the bottom, and then stuff that's a lot looser in between. So I tried to think, well, how can I really expand on this idea? Because obviously you can't, as an architect, experiment all the time, because clients don't typically want, your experiments. They want their nice Tuscan villas. So I've been using AI as a way of testing these ideas a little bit more. So in this case, this is DALL-E in ChatGPT 4. And what's nice about ChatGPT 4 is that you can insert images. So I inserted images of my original design, and then I had the ChatGPT 4 generate these. But what's also great about it is that you can kind of type. So you can insert an image, and then you can put a prompt, and then it generates. So this was one of many iterations. So if you look at the bottom right one, the principle is that these round structures at the bottom are supposed to kind of be like huts. And they're supposed to be made of very ephemeral materials. So those could be made of like normal shack-like material or whatever the case may be. You have a base at the bottom, which is supposed to be about resilience. So this could be somewhere like in Alex or in Kliptown, where you might find that there's flooding or something like that. So the aim is to create a resilient base, a resilient roof, and then they're standing on posts. And so the stuff in between could change. So depending on, your family, depending on the circumstances, that's what I'm calling the ephemeral, the soft in-between parts. So it's like, almost a bit like an exoskeleton with soft tissue on the inside. And the reason these are like dome-like structures like this is because I'm, interested in creating architecture that somehow reflects indigenous and traditional values. So it's really about communal spaces outside these little hut-like things. It's better seen in the image on the bottom right, although those little domes are very small. But the idea is that there's like communal life outside, which is part of the values of the people. And then the inside of these huts are really where you store things, where you sleep, etc. So it's a little bit like a traditional homestead, except that, you're introducing these new ideas. And then obviously at the top is solar. And if you combine this with maybe like Wi-Fi, like some very robust Wi-Fi, unlike ours, you could actually see these as very flexible, very resilient, decentralized kind of units, which are different from the way we think about habitation today. So I took these ideas even further. I just inserted them, that same image, I inserted it into Midjourney to try and produce more of these ideas. So you can see it's always the same. It's the shelter at the top, it's a base at the bottom, and then stuff happening in between. And for me, this started to feel like a kind of typology, which, is building on the work that people like Francis Carey are doing. And you can see how it, for me, it just feels like it's got a lot of potential. The roof is this large canopy, it's shading people. But, obviously during winter, people can live outside in the sun as well, as in, where there's a lot of solar radiation. And then these very interesting roofs where your solar panels can be. I haven't done daylighting tests or anything like that. So this is all just, kind of conceptual. So this is sort of Midjourney images pushing these ideas a bit more. Like what would it be like if now you were to try and implement some of these things in a very informal type of settlement? So I took images of the buildings that I did back home and I combined them with some of those, and these are the results. And then I think these were probably some of the more successful ones. So you can really get a sense of this canopy structure, and then underneath the canopy structure. So the canopy structure could be where the solar is. Underneath the canopy structure is the soft tissue bit. And you can see there's a lot of socialization. There's a lot of life happening under there. And then there's this base. And I like the tire things that are happening here. I mean, Midjourney just sort of picks up on anything. But what's interesting about that for me is that a lot of the buildings that I've done, I've not done many, but the ones that I've done have always been, trying to recycle materials and experimenting in that way. So for me, this was quite exciting. So this was this experiment. So other work that I've done trying to explore and experiment with AI. So this was sketches that we did for a competition called the Africa Town competition. And really what that project was about identity. You know, there's this boat that took people quite late in the history of the transatlantic slave trade. When it was now illegal, this boat was called the Klatoa, and it took people from Africa to America illegally. And some of the people who were on that boat, their descendants are alive today in a place called Africa Town. And some of them actually have living memory of those who were brought, their great-grandparents or something like that. So the idea of the competition was to create a place where to firstly upgrade the whole of Africa Town, and then to create places that can connect them to their heritage as being basically the last Africans to be taken to America, or at least in recorded. And so this was a project I did with architect Peter Rich and Activate Architects. And the idea, you know, I was given a portion of the site to deal with. And the idea of what I was doing here was to, again, experiment with this idea of the canopy. And then inside the canopy are these sort of, the one in the right in the front is like a woven basket-like structure. And then the ones in the background are maybe made of earth. And these are kind of like upside down huts. And the idea was to create the sort of flowy space with these pods, and inside these pods people can visit. And so they were meant to give people a feeling of being kind of like in an African village, but in a contemporary way, in an artistic and creative way. That was the aim of the project. So even here, you kind of, you know, you could think of a village, a Dogon village, for instance, and the sort of decorative motifs on their buildings, and also just the sort of life of living between the buildings, like what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So I wanted to see what more I could achieve if I experimented with DALL-E to explore this idea a bit more. So these were images that came out of DALL-E, which I found incredibly exciting because DALL-E was not lazy to do all the patterns. And it was also a lot more experimental than I was. I think I was a little bit more conservative. And this is what I was talking about earlier about form and how things look, because, you know, the whole idea of paradigmatic shift for me is that we talk a lot about designing sustainable buildings and talking about shifting towards green transitions, sustainability. But then often the buildings that we show as alternatives and as a way of wooing people away from the status quo are just, you know, often they're just not nice in my view, you know. And that's why I was saying, yes, we need to obviously think about function, and we need to think about, you know, aligning our buildings with the pre-existing conditions of the life that we live, the environment that we're in. But if you look at traditional architecture, their buildings were very much in line with the pre-existing conditions of those places, but they were also expressive and beautiful. So to me, this is what came out of this experiment. Other than just the spatiality, the quality of the spaces was quite interesting. So then I thought maybe I should try and push this a little bit more and take these images into Midjourney. So the one on the left is the DALL-E one, and you can see that DALL-E is quite artistic, which has its own beauty. The one on the right is Midjourney. So Midjourney is kind of, you can see the canopy structure at the top, held up by some sort of columns, and then the roundish sort of structures at the bottom. And so I experimented with this a bit more, you know, and I just must say that the workflow for me using these AI tools is just never linear at all. You know, I'll try something in, is it called LookX, where I do a sketch and then I put it in there. I'll show you some examples. I think, I don't know if I still have examples on this presentation, but you do a sketch and then you put it in the AI and then it sort of generates a more realistic image. And then I take that to Midjourney, and then in Midjourney, I'll say blend that with my original design, and then it creates something. and then maybe I'll take it to ChatGPT. So it's like a much more fluid thing. I don't have a very linear workflow. So what I really liked about these was the materiality that it was capturing, the texturing, and it really made me think a lot about, what I'm beginning to call a soft transition to sustainable futures, because it's like there's this use of ephemeral materials on the inside, and maybe you could use those to generate walls and partitions and whatever, and they could be all very natural materials. But then the outer shell of this whole building could be something a lot more hardy and a lot more protective. So it's almost like we need to do an analysis of a building where we determine at what point do we really, really need something that is like 100-year, 200-year guaranteeing robustness, compared to something that doesn't need to have that level of robustness, that's a lot more ephemeral, natural, that can maybe decay over time. So this is what was coming through this. And on top of that, someone told me when I last presented this that, this is so pastiche and kitsch and whatever, it's just very surface. But it's actually really more about the concept and the principle of soft inside, hard outside. Okay, so this is just images I put in of a recent presentation of a master's student at TUT. We were very impressed by her project. She was looking at creating artifacts for birthing rituals, traditional birthing rituals. So that's her sitting on the left. I should actually have asked her to use this, but anyway, I'll talk to her later. And I just thought, well, maybe let me put this through Midjourney and see what it could produce. And if you look carefully, the image on the left, you'll see, if you kind of look at her presentation, she was meant to design this pod, which was supposed to be where the actual birthing will happen. So her whole concept was about how in traditional culture, a woman would need to have been taken away to give birth somewhere. Traditionally, it would be in a little hut or something. But in modern contexts, we can't always do that, and people live in apartments and that sort of thing. So she was trying to design a birthing pod that would maintain the cultural values, but then adapt them to a modern context. So on the right, I took this image, just this image on the left. There was some processing in the sense that I did sort of do a number of iterations. And so on the right are iterations of what this presentation could have been like had she actually built a bigger, you can see there's a smaller model on her one on the left image, but what if she built a bigger model? She had more time, more resources. And I think this is very interesting because if you say to students, okay, do a mock presentation, they do a mock presentation like the one on the left, maybe not as resolved, and then they put it through Midjourney. It could then give them ideas, not just about their presentation, but about how is this going to, I suppose it is about presentation, but how can I really get my message across? So she had like her artifacts, many of them on the floor, but on the right, you can see that some of them are hanging on the wall. So that could have been, an approach. And then I took those same images of hers and I combined them with this architect, Neri Osman. She does like all sorts of interesting biomimicry stuff. Like, for example, there was this structure, it was made by silkworms. And I said, well, maybe let me, because, the student also wanted to explore the materiality of these birthing rituals. But as you can see, she ended up just doing sort of mock objects using SA pine, which were incredibly beautiful. But imagine had she had the time and, the opportunity to really explore the materiality and the quality. So for me, this could be a tool that a student could use to be like, how could I think about this? How could I think about my presentation? How could I think about the concept that I'm trying to put across? So I'm just going to quickly talk about the last project that we did with AI. This was actually images from the South African Pavilion at the Venice Biennale that myself, Dr. Emmanuel Ngambula and Stephen Stein curated this year. And these images are actually images of the living landscape, like the one that I showed earlier. And the idea was this was supposed to be this cave that people come to, almost like a ritual space. And so when I came back to Johannesburg, I decided to take some of those drawings and do an exhibition as part of the Fakugezi Festival. And the idea was to create a space that's supposed to almost be like, so remember I spoke earlier about how rituals are ways in which people can pivot to alternative paradigms. So I used the drawings and the space of the exhibition to try and have people for a moment, momentarily suspend their understanding of what Johannesburg is, and then introduce them to a parallel alternative Johannesburg. So I used AI to begin generating some images of buildings and designs. So all of these are, connected to these ideas of biomimicry. And like I said, this is very much about how the buildings look. I haven't done anything in terms of the systems and how they work, etc. But the idea was we wanted to have people emotively be attracted to the idea of what would a biomimicry, sustainable, culturally relevant Johannesburg look like? Because we believe that if we can convince society today that the alternative is actually way better than the current, that's how we can get buy-in. So this was the actual exhibition, and that was how the artworks were situated. And so this is just a film, which I will just move to the end, that we were showing during the exhibition. So I'll just move it right to the end.
The middle of Johannesburg City. Imagine a group of people performing a ritual in an open plain in the middle of Johannesburg City. Iterate. Imagine in the background there's a canopy to provide shade. Iterate. Imagine large earth canopies in the background. Combine version 1 with 2. Imagine a sacred space in the middle of Johannesburg CBD where people are performing a ritual. Imagine that there are people dressed in white. Imagine that they are underneath a structure that is made of earth. Imagine the space is surrounded by nature and protective canopies. Imagine a shading structure in the background. Then version 1 and version 2. Iterate. 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 Then version 1 and version 2. Iterate. Iterate.
All right, that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sechaba. That was mind-blowing. Really, really great and interesting. And I love the two presentations together, like the one on biomimicry and yours more on the cultural side. Really showed a lot of potential of the AI in the industry. Cool. I'm going to open the floor for questions. There's a question from Francois. Is the image generating software used for a paid or a free software?
So they are paid. So Mid-Journey is kind of, I always say it's kind of like airtime. You pay as you go, you buy kind of hours. I don't exactly know how the hours work, but you buy hours or time. And then ChatGPT 4, which is probably the most powerful tool I've ever used in my life, you pay like 300 and something bucks a month. The normal ChatGPT, you don't pay anything. And then CoolX or something like that, you also pay a small fee. So yeah, you do pay for some of them.
Milan, on your side?
Yeah, same thing. So some of our team members use the free ChatGPT. Some had paid ChatGPT 4 access, which also included the DALI imaging software. I bought some Mid-Journey airtime. So yeah, it's a combination, but it's easily accessible and not that expensive at the moment. So
Great. There's an interesting question from Sandra in the chat. The question is around cost, and obviously a lot of the presentation was a lot around the visualization. Is at this stage of the AI, is it already possible to budget works and project according to the alterations changes in the build complex? So I guess the question is around like, can we already use AI to then like take your concept further into like buildability, like costings and other sustainability KPIs, so to say?
So I've tried doing stuff like doing a area schedule, for instance, with ChatGPT 4. And it worked to a certain degree, but I don't know if I'm skilled enough to do something like that. So ChatGPT 4 for me, to try and get it to look at a floor plan and get some data out of it, it struggled a little bit. But you can put Excel spreadsheets into ChatGPT 4. And if you've already got like, numbers and you've got things that you want analyzed or, I don't know, engaged in whatever way, you can upload spreadsheets. And I think, although Elon Musk did say that it's not very, or was it Steve Jobs? One of them said that it's not the most reliable with calculations. I haven't had a problem with it. And I'm not saying my maths is great, but so, you'd have to experiment. The experiments that I've done, I would say there's been 50% failure, 50% pass. Yeah, Milan, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, I don't have much insight into that because I haven't really played in that area, but I just want to emphasize that, AI is a tool ultimately. And so it's what you put in is what you're going to get out as well. So it's just the understanding that, and I mean, there's going to be plenty of development, I'm sure, in the next few years, maybe in the next few months at this rate. We might foresee AI being able to ultimately do that. But for the time being, it's just to realize that it is a tool and it needs information to come in, which you've got to feed it. It does its computation and will give you an output that, again, may not necessarily be exact into the T. And so there's a lot of development still in the area that is going to be done. But it's definitely an exciting space to just keep your eye on and continue to play and experiment like what we've done so far.
Yeah, thanks. I think we're going to see a lot more of that developed in the coming months. There's a question from Hanley. How do you start feeding AI and mid-journey info? How do you maybe help very practically? How do you do it?
I mean, for me, it was as simple as having a conversation, literally just saying, please provide me an image or please provide me a breakdown of X, Y, and Z. And again, it's a tool. Giving it input, it's very versatile as well. So it's not limiting in the sense of what you can give it. It might be limiting in the sense of what output it gives you, but it's literally just having a conversation as you would with Siri or any other of these technological tools that we are already accustomed to. So
I would recommend, someone gave me very, very powerful advice once, and they said that with ChatGPT or ChatGPT 4, what you should first do when you start using it is ask it what you can do with it. And it gives you a whole list of things that you can do, and just keep asking it questions in relation to what you do, whatever, until you get a sense of, what it is it can possibly do and how it does it. So it's the most natural kind of dialoguing tool, especially ChatGPT 4. And now it's even got you can actually speak to it with your voice and it speaks back with its voice, which is actually really incredible. I've been trying to get it to tell me the story of humanity and how we lost our way from being connected to nature. And I get it to tell my kids those stories all the time. and it's incredibly powerful. If you haven't looked at the TED Talk by Khan Academy, they say that ChatGPT and AI will be one of the biggest revolutions because of what it will do with education. And when a tool can speak to your kids and give them information like that, I think it's incredible.
Great. Cool. So a big thank you to our speakers today, Milan, Stefano, and Sechaba. Really amazing presentations. Yeah, mind-blowing. I really, really enjoyed it, both of the presentations. And then I just want to thank my events committee from the RCSA for, their dedication to these webinars. Janice for being very consistent with the CPD points and the attendance register, Milan, the graphic designs and the social media, Lisette with the sponsorship, and Bosa with the topic and speakers helping with that. And lastly, Amy, who's generated our YouTube channel and is like really taking all these webinars and video recordings into an actual recording on YouTube. So really thank you. Really appreciate all your input into this, into the webinar events committee. And besides that, it's a really nice group. So in case this motivates you, you're more than welcome to join our group and share the load of organizing webinars. Please feel free to reach out to us and come and help us. If anyone knows of a sponsor that wants to sponsor the Regenerative Collaborative or one of the webinars, please let us know. And again, just where you can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Eventbrite. And please follow us so we can widen the community and the collaboration. And with that, I'm gonna say thank you for attending the last webinar of the year. On behalf of the Regenerative Collaborative South Africa, thanks Sechaba, thanks Milan, thanks Stefano for today's webinar, and I really hope to see you all in the next year in 2024. Great. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.